I, 34F, have been struggling with whether to post this, but I need advice on handling this situation. First, let me provide some background on how everything started. I met Harold, 33M, at a networking event 3 years ago through my college friend Lisa who worked with him. Harold caught my attention immediately, not just because he was handsome, but because of how respectfully he treated everyone around him. He made sure every woman in our group got home safely that night and even called each of us the next day to check if we were okay. We started dating soon after. Harold was everything I wanted in a partner: caring, ambitious, and seemingly protective of women. He worked as a project manager at a large construction firm where Norman, 72M, was his direct boss. Harold always spoke highly of Norman, describing him as a father figure who guided his career. Norman had apparently taken Harold under his wing when no one else would give him a chance, and helped him climb from junior supervisor to project manager in just 5 years. I first met Norman at a company Christmas party 6 months into dating Harold. He seemed charming in that old school way, always holding doors open, pulling out chairs for ladies, and making sure everyone's glasses were full. His wife Martha was equally lovely. She brought me homemade cookies the first time I visited their house and always made me feel welcome. They had been married for 40 years and everyone saw them as the perfect couple. Harold proposed after 2 years of dating, and we had a beautiful wedding last summer. Norman gave a touching speech about how Harold was like the son he never had. Looking back, there were some red flags during the wedding that I ignored. My cousin Emma, 25F, told me Norman kept following her around and making comments about her dress. My bridesmaid Sarah mentioned he tried to get her number, saying he could help her career. I brushed these off thinking he was just being friendly after having too much champagne. A month after our honeymoon, Norman invited us to spend a weekend at his beach house. Harold was ecstatic because apparently Norman rarely invited employees to his private residence. The invitation felt like we were being welcomed into their family. The beach house was gorgeous, right on the water with a private pool and stunning views. The first day went perfectly. Martha made her famous lasagna, we went swimming, and spent the evening playing board games. Norman was the perfect host, sharing funny stories about Harold's early days at work. I started feeling guilty about ever doubting his intentions based on the wedding incidents. Everything changed on the second evening. Norman announced he had made dinner reservations at an upscale restaurant to celebrate with some of their close friends. I wore a knee-length black dress with long sleeves that had a small teardrop cut out near the collarbone. It was one of my favorite dresses, elegant but not revealing at all. Martha even complimented me on my choice, saying it was perfect for the restaurant. At the restaurant, I somehow ended up sitting directly across from Norman. Throughout dinner, I kept catching him staring at my chest area. At first, I tried ignoring it, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. But then he started making comments like how he had the best view at the table and kept trying to catch my eye. I felt increasingly uncomfortable but didn't want to create a scene at this fancy restaurant with his friends. The air conditioning was strong, so I tried putting on my jacket. Norman loudly said, "Don't hide the view from me, darling." His wife Martha seemed embarrassed and told him to behave, but Harold just sat there silently, focusing on his food. As the night progressed and more wine was served, Norman's comments became more frequent and inappropriate. He kept finding excuses to brush against me when walking past, and once even put his hand on my lower back while pretending to squeeze past my chair. The worst part came during goodbyes. Norman insisted on hugging everyone, but when he got to me, his hands wandered much lower than appropriate and he tried pulling me closer. I immediately stepped away and stayed glued to Harold's side for the rest of the night. In the car ride back, I was shaking with anger and humiliation. When we got to our room, I told Harold how uncomfortable Norman's behavior made me feel. To my shock, Harold defended him, saying Norman was just being friendly and that's how he is with everyone. When I brought up the inappropriate touching, Harold suggested maybe I had too much wine and was misinterpreting things. We had our first major fight as a married couple that night. The next morning, we left early using work as an excuse. Martha called me later that week to apologize for Norman's behavior. She revealed that Norman had a history of being inappropriate with younger women, but everyone ignored it because of his position and age. She had tried talking to him about it multiple times, but he always dismissed her concerns. She warned me to be careful around him but begged me not to tell Harold about our conversation as it would create problems between him and Norman. Over the next few months, I avoided any gatherings where Norman would be present. Harold seemed to understand initially and declined several invitations from Norman. However, last week Harold casually mentioned that Norman was having a big birthday celebration at his beach house and he wanted to attend. When I reminded him why I wasn't comfortable with Norman, Harold got defensive and said I was being controlling. He claimed Norman was just trying to compliment me that night and I was overreacting. He even brought up that Norman was his mentor and friend long before he met me. We had another massive fight where I told Harold how violated and unsupported I felt when he didn't stand up for me. Harold eventually apologized and said he wouldn't go to the party. But yesterday I discovered he had already RSVP'd yes for both of us weeks ago. When confronted, he said he thought I would change my mind by then. The most frustrating part is Harold's double standards. Just last month, when a male colleague called me busty at work, Harold was ready to confront him immediately. He said no man should talk about his wife's body like that. But apparently when his 70-year-old friend does much worse, it's perfectly acceptable, and I'm just being sensitive. I don't know how to make Harold understand that maintaining a friendship with someone who sexually harassed his wife is not okay. I'm considering staying with my sister for a few days to clear my head. Any advice would be appreciated. Update 1: I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and suggestions on my last post. The situation has taken several unexpected turns that I need to share. Despite our agreement and his promise that he wouldn't attend, Harold went to Norman's birthday party last weekend. He didn't tell me directly, instead, he made up a story about going fishing with his work friends. I would have never known if my sister hadn't seen photos of the party on Facebook and sent them to me. The photos themselves were infuriating enough. Harold was laughing and socializing with Norman like nothing was wrong. But what really got to me were the pictures of young women at the party, most likely employees' wives and girlfriends, who looked visibly uncomfortable around Norman. One particular photo showed a woman in her 20s trying to step away while Norman had his arm around her waist. Another showed Norman showing something on his phone to Harold, both of them laughing while looking at the screen. When Harold came home that evening smelling of expensive whiskey, Norman's favorite, I confronted him with the photos. Instead of showing any remorse for lying, he immediately got defensive and angry. He accused me of spying on him and said I had no right to monitor his activities through other people. According to him, he only lied because I was being unreasonable about his friendship with Norman, and he needed to maintain good relations for his career. That's when Harold revealed something he'd been hiding for months. Norman had offered him a position as partner in his new construction venture. The salary was nearly double what Harold currently makes, plus a significant ownership stake in the company. Harold admitted he'd been discussing this opportunity with Norman since before the beach house incident, and that's why he couldn't risk damaging their relationship over what he called a misunderstanding. He tried justifying everything by saying Norman's behavior was just old-school friendliness, and that I needed to learn to handle such situations better if we wanted a better future. He even suggested that my inability to adapt to different workplace cultures might hurt my own career someday. According to Harold, successful people in the construction industry sometimes have different social standards, and we need to accept that for professional growth. Worried about what this meant, I called Martha the next day. I needed to understand more about this business venture and why Norman was suddenly so interested in making Harold a partner. What Martha told me made my blood run cold. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Norman had made such offers to young employees with attractive wives or girlfriends. She revealed that 3 couples had moved away from the city in the past 5 years after similar experiences. According to Martha, Norman would first identify ambitious young men with attractive partners. He would mentor them, gain their trust, and then offer them lucrative business opportunities. Once they were financially dependent on him, his behavior toward their wives would escalate. Martha sounded exhausted and defeated as she shared this information. She warned me to be very careful and said she wished she had spoken up years ago. When I tried sharing this information with Harold, he completely dismissed it. He accused me of conspiring with Martha to sabotage his career opportunities out of personal jealousy. He claimed Martha was just bitter because Norman spent more time at work than with her, and that she'd been trying to cause problems in Norman's professional relationships for years. Our argument reached new heights when Harold casually mentioned that Norman and Martha wanted to host a dinner at their house to discuss the business proposal in detail. He had already accepted without consulting me and expected me to attend and be civil because this was about our future. When I refused to go, Harold implied that my unwillingness to tolerate minor discomfort for his career growth showed I wasn't truly committed to our marriage or our future. That comment was the final straw for me. I packed enough clothes for a week and drove to my sister's house. Harold has been alternating between flooding my phone with apologetic messages and sending angry texts about how I'm overreacting and ruining his big chance. His messages ranged from "I love you," "please come home to you're being selfish and childish about this whole thing." Yesterday, things escalated further when Norman showed up at my workplace unannounced. He told the receptionist he was my father-in-law and needed to speak to me urgently about a family emergency. Thankfully, I had already warned security about the possibility of him showing up, and they didn't let him enter. He left a handwritten note with security saying he just wanted to clear up any misunderstandings and ensure his favorite employee's marriage wasn't ruined over a few harmless compliments. I'm still trying to process how quickly my loving, Supportive husband turned into someone who prioritizes his career and friendship over my safety and comfort. My sister thinks Harold is being manipulated by Norman, using the business opportunity as bait. But I'm starting to wonder if this is who Harold always was, and I just never noticed because Norman's influence was more subtle before. I've blocked Norman's number and am considering legal options about his workplace visit. Some of our mutual friends are saying I'm overreacting and potentially ruining Harold's career over a few inappropriate comments from an old man. But after learning about Norman's pattern of behavior from Martha, I can't help but feel there's something more sinister at play here. Update 2: Things have gotten significantly worse since my last update. After staying at my sister's for 2 weeks, Harold showed up at her doorstep crying. He broke down completely, admitting he had been wrong to prioritize Norman over me. He swore he would decline the business offer and cut all contact with Norman if I came back home. He looked genuinely devastated and kept saying he couldn't lose me over this. I missed him terribly and wanted to believe him. My sister was skeptical, but I decided to give our marriage another chance. I moved back home, and for about a week, everything seemed perfect. Harold was attentive, caring, and didn't mention Norman at all. He even changed his phone number to avoid Norman's calls. However, my world came crashing down again when I discovered something disturbing on Harold's laptop. I was using it to check my email, with his permission, when a chat notification from Norman popped up. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. What I found made me physically sick. There were months of chat history between Harold and Norman. The most disturbing part was that Norman had been sending photos of me taken at his beach house without my knowledge. There were pictures of me in my swimsuit by the pool, some taken through windows when I was changing, and even some from angles that suggested hidden cameras in private areas. But what hurt more than the invasion of privacy was Harold's responses to these photos. Instead of being outraged or defending me, Harold had responded with laughing emojis and comments suggesting I should feel flattered by Norman's attention. In some conversations, they even discussed my body in detail. The chat history showed this had been going on since our first visit to the beach house. When I confronted Harold with the chat logs, he first tried denying knowledge of the photos. When I showed him proof of his responses, he switched to justifying it. He claimed it was just guys being guys and that sharing photos in group chats was normal. He genuinely couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal about it. I immediately called Martha to warn her about the hidden cameras. Her response shocked me even more. She wasn't surprised at all and confessed that she had discovered similar photos of other women on Norman's computer years ago. She had chosen to stay silent to protect Norman's reputation and their social standing in the community. She also revealed that Harold had been visiting their house regularly for private meetings with Norman, even during the 2 weeks I was staying at my sister's. The conversation with Martha revealed more disturbing information. She told me this wasn't Norman's first time doing this. He had done the same thing with previous employees and their wives. 2 women had filed complaints years ago, but Norman paid them substantial amounts to keep quiet. The worst part was learning that Harold knew about these incidents before he even introduced me to Norman. I confronted Harold about knowing Norman's history of harassment. After hours of arguing, he finally admitted that he knew but didn't think Norman would do the same with me. Then came another bombshell. Harold had already accepted Norman's business offer and signed the partnership papers the previous week. According to him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could set us up for life. When I told him I was leaving, Harold's entire demeanor changed. He said I was being dramatic about a few harmless photos and that I should be grateful for Norman's interest in our success. He even suggested that many women would be flattered by such attention from a powerful businessman. I'm currently staying at a hotel and have contacted a lawyer about the photos. Harold keeps switching between begging me to come back and accusing me of trying to ruin his career over nothing. He's convinced that once I calm down, I'll realize I'm overreacting to what he calls harmless male behavior. My sister wants me to file for divorce immediately, but I'm still in shock that the man I married could betray my trust like this. Some of our friends are suggesting marriage counseling, but I don't see how I can ever trust Harold again knowing he willingly exposed me to this kind of violation. Update 3: Many people have been messaging me asking for an update, so I wanted to share how everything concluded. After discovering the hidden camera photos, I filed for divorce immediately. Harold spent weeks trying to change my mind, showing up at my hotel and my sister's house with grand promises. He claimed he would quit the partnership with Norman, move to a different city, and even offered to buy me my dream house. But I couldn't get past his betrayal. What cemented my decision was new information from Martha. She found old text messages between Harold and Norman from before our first beach house visit. In these messages, Norman explicitly told Harold about his hidden camera setup, presenting it as a perk of their friendship. He even joked about getting good angles of employees' wives. Harold had responded enthusiastically, saying he couldn't wait for our visit. The divorce proceedings revealed even more disturbing patterns. Norman had a well-established system of grooming young employees by offering them business partnerships. The catch was that he expected unrestricted access to their personal lives, especially their wives. 2 previous partners had quietly sold their shares and moved away after similar incidents, but they were bound by strict NDAs as part of their exit agreements. Harold's true colors really showed during the divorce. He tried to paint me as mentally unstable and money-hungry, claiming I was targeting Norman for financial gain. He told everyone I had seduced Norman and was now trying to extort him. But the evidence was too strong. The photos, messages, and Martha's testimony helped me get a restraining order against both Harold and Norman. The most painful part wasn't losing Harold or the marriage, it was realizing that the man I thought would protect me had willingly served me up for harassment to advance his career. He knew about the cameras before taking me to that house. He read Norman's messages about me and laughed. He watched me struggle with anxiety after the dinner incident while secretly encouraging Norman's behavior. Martha finally found the courage to leave Norman after 40 years of marriage. She's now helping me build a case against him, reaching out to other women he harassed. Several former employees' wives have come forward with similar stories, though some are still afraid to speak publicly due to their husbands' careers. Harold is still working with Norman. I heard they're planning to expand the business to other cities. Some mutual friends have sided with Harold, saying I'm vindictive and destroyed a good man's life over some harmless photos. Others have completely cut ties with both Harold and Norman after learning the truth. I moved to a different city for a fresh start. The legal proceedings are ongoing, but I'm focusing on rebuilding my life. The hardest lesson from all this was realizing that someone who truly loves you would never knowingly put you in harm's way, let alone participate in your harassment for personal gain. To those who might recognize this story, yes, Harold and Norman are still running their successful construction business. They're probably still pulling the same tricks with new employees and their wives. But at least now their true nature is exposed, and other women can make informed choices about letting their husbands work there. I won't be posting any more updates. I want to thank everyone who supported me through this nightmare. And to the women who privately messaged me with similar experiences, I believe you, and I hope you find the strength to stand up for yourselves too.